The historical record often overlooks the lives of religious women, yet their experiences reveal fundamental truths about power, faith, and survival that reshape our understanding of the past. For 6 centuries, the Ottoman Empire governed vast Christian populations across 3 continents. Within its territories stood hundreds of convents that had existed since Byzantine times. What happened to these communities represents one of history's most significant, yet least examined transformations. This isn't a story of simple conquest. It's about how systems of religious hierarchy functioned in practice, how women navigated impossible circumstances, and how entire civilizations were gradually transformed through mechanisms most history books never discuss. Drawing from Ottoman administrative records, Christian ecclesiastical sources, and archaeological evidence, we'll examine what the documents actually tell us about this era. Before we can understand what changed, we need to grasp what existed. Byzantine convents weren't peripheral institutions. They were centers of education, healthcare, manuscript preservation, and agricultural production. Unlike Western European convents, largely populated by nobility, Byzantine convents welcomed women across social classes, widows, unmarried women choosing spiritual devotion, and educated women who maintained libraries rivaling any university. When Constantinople fell in 1953, Sultan Mehmed II inherited not just a city, but a 1,000-year-old civilization with deeply rooted Christian institutions. The Ottoman administrative system classified Christians as dhimmi, protected subjects under Islamic law. This status guaranteed survival, but not equality. The transformation occurred gradually across different regions at different rates. Some areas experienced immediate pressure. Others maintained relative stability for generations. Understanding this variation is crucial. Ottoman rule wasn't monolithic, but certain patterns appeared consistently across territories and time periods. The devshirme system systematically recruited Christian boys aged 7 to 14 for conversion to Islam and service to the Sultan as janissaries or administrators. Ottoman officials visited Christian villages every few years, selecting the strongest and most intelligent boys who would never see their families again. Primary sources document how families responded. Serbian and Greek records describe parents deliberately malnourishing sons to avoid selection, hiding boys in forests, or temporarily sheltering them in monasteries. Convents became sanctuaries during these recruitment periods. Here's what the documents show. Nuns hid children in underground chambers, wine cellars, and storage areas when Ottoman officials arrived. This wasn't without risk. Communities caught sheltering eligible boys faced collective punishment and heavy fines. When hidden children were discovered, interrogations followed about whether others had participated. The punishment records are revealing. Byzantine ecclesiastical sources from the 15th and 16th centuries describe convents searched repeatedly for hidden children. The nuns faced an impossible moral choice. Their vows called them to protect orphans and vulnerable children, but doing so endangered their entire community. The devshirme's deeper impact extended beyond individual families. It systematically removed the brightest Christian boys, generation after generation, converting them to Islam and erasing their original identities. For religious communities dedicated to preserving Christian culture, this represented civilizational erosion in slow motion. The jizya tax, imposed on non-Muslim males, reveals how economic policy functioned as religious policy. This wasn't merely a revenue measure. Collection ceremonies were designed to ritualize subordination. Christian men standing while Muslim officials sat, sometimes having their beards pulled, while Quranic verses about subjugation were recited. Ottoman tax records show Christians paid the jizya, plus higher property taxes, commercial levies, and various surcharges Muslims didn't face. The cumulative burden made supporting religious institutions increasingly difficult. When Christian families struggled to pay mandatory taxes, donations to convents ceased, Examine the financial documents from Cyprus, Crete, and Greek territories. Converts that had been self-sufficient through agriculture suddenly couldn't maintain solvency because Christian-produced goods faced discriminatory taxation compared to Muslim-produced goods. Olive groves, supporting communities for centuries, generated insufficient revenue under Ottoman tax codes. This economic pressure required no dramatic violence. The account books tell the story. Convents unable to pay taxes faced confiscation. Buildings housing religious communities for hundreds of years were simply emptied, their inhabitants dispersed. Greek Orthodox records from the 16th through 18th centuries document dozens of convents that ceased existing not through military action, but through financial impossibility. Surviving convents experienced severe austerity. Building maintenance became impossible. Libraries deteriorated without preservation funds. Educational programs ended. These institutions had survived barbarian invasions and Byzantine political turmoil, but couldn't survive a tax code designed to drain them systematically of resources. Official Ottoman policy theoretically protected Christians as people of the book, but administrative records from Anatolia and the Balkans reveal significant gaps between policy and practice. Local officials, particularly in regions distant from Constantinople, regularly pressured Christians to convert. During military campaigns or periods of instability, communities sometimes faced ultimatums: convert or face enslavement. This wasn't theoretical. Ottoman court records document villages that refused conversion and subsequently saw their populations enslaved and sold in markets. For convents, the pressure intensified during military campaigns when normal legal protections collapsed. Nuns who had taken lifetime vows of devotion faced demands to renounce their faith. The choice between maintaining religious identity and avoiding enslavement created existential crises that challenged everything these women believed. The responses varied. Some chose martyrdom, openly refusing conversion despite threats. Ottoman administrative records occasionally mention executions of Christian religious figures for refusing conversion, though these documents typically frame such events as responses to rebellion rather than religious persecution. Other women made different calculations. They converted outwardly while attempting to maintain Christian faith secretly. This crypto-Christianity existed throughout Ottoman territories. For women from convents, it meant attending mosque publicly while secretly maintaining Christian prayers, reciting the Quran while hiding Christian texts. The legal framework made this extraordinarily dangerous. Ottoman Islamic law prescribed death for apostasy from Islam. Someone who converted from Christianity to Islam could never legally return to Christianity. Women forced to convert lived in constant fear, unable to openly practice their faith even if circumstances changed. It's called Balkan sources describe convents that officially converted to Islam, their buildings becoming mosques, while some women remained under new religious identities. Consider the spiritual burden. Decades spent in Christian worship, now forced to pray toward Mecca, in the chapel where you once received communion. Ottoman elite maintained extensive harems ranging from wives to concubines to servants. While some women arrived through voluntary marriage or diplomatic arrangements, many others came through capture, slave market purchases, or abduction. Christian women, particularly educated ones, commanded premium prices. A woman who could read, who had studied in a convent, who knew music or poetry, was especially valuable. This created systematic targeting of convents as sources of educated women. Military campaign records show the pattern. When Ottoman forces conquered Christian territories, soldiers traditionally took captives as compensation. Religious communities were frequent targets because they housed women undefended by male relatives who couldn't flee quickly. Greek and Armenian ecclesiastical sources document specific raids. Women were sold in Constantinople slave markets, distributed among Ottoman officials as military rewards, or sent to powerful officials' harems. For nuns, this represented violation of their most sacred vows of chastity. The psychological trauma extended beyond immediate violence. Women taken to harems could rarely return. Even if escape or release occurred, Christian communities often shunned women who had been in harems, considering them defiled. The social stigma meant effective erasure from former communities and identities. Ottoman palace records provide fragmentary evidence. The imperial harem contained women from across the empire, including documented cases from Christian religious backgrounds. Later Ottoman historians sometimes presented the harem as a place of opportunity, but this narrative erases the fundamental lack of choice. Some convents maintained escape routes through underground tunnels or mountain paths. The most disturbing accounts describe nuns choosing death over capture. While Byzantine theology generally condemns suicide, some contemporary religious authorities argued that women choosing death to preserve chastity achieve martyrdom rather than committing sin. This theological rationalization reveals the desperate circumstances. Ottoman law codes imposed detailed regulations on Christian religious life. Churches couldn't exceed mosque heights. Church bells were prohibited or severely restricted. Religious processions followed specified routes, avoiding Muslim neighborhoods. Christians wore distinctive clothing, immediately identifying their religious status. For convents, these created practical hardships. Buildings needing repair couldn't be rebuilt to original heights if they exceeded nearby mosque heights. Bells calling communities to prayer for centuries fell silent. Religious processions marking the liturgical calendar for generations were banned or rerouted. Clothing regulations carried particular significance. Ottoman law required Christian women to wear different colors and styles than Muslim women, making them immediately identifiable. Nuns couldn't move through cities anonymously. Everyone could identify them as Christian religious women, creating vulnerability to harassment and discrimination. The bell prohibition had profound psychological effects. For centuries, bells had marked religious life's rhythm, calling communities to dawn, noon, and evening prayers, marking feast days and fast days. Silencing the bells disrupted the temporal structure of Christian religious life itself. Serbian monastic records describe alternative systems: wooden boards struck with hammers replacing bells, runners notifying community members of prayer times. These workarounds could never fully replace the bells connecting Christian communities across distances and through time. Religious procession restrictions struck at communal identity. Orthodox Christianity had rich traditions of outdoor processions marking major feasts. These made faith visible and communal. When Ottoman authorities restricted them, they pushed Christianity into private, invisible spaces. The Ottoman land system didn't recognize private ownership as Europeans understood it. Most land technically belonged to the Sultan, with individuals or institutions holding use rights. This made Christian religious properties vulnerable. When convents struggled with tax payments, officials declared properties forfeited. Buildings that had been Christian religious spaces for centuries became mosques, Islamic schools, or private properties for Muslim officials. This happened incrementally, one building lost, then another, until entire complexes had transferred away. Greek and Armenian sources document specific examples. The monastery of Stedios in Constantinople, once among the most important monastic centers in Christendom, saw properties gradually confiscated until it ceased functioning. Countless smaller convents experienced similar fates throughout Ottoman territories. The legal framework made challenging confiscations nearly impossible. Ottoman courts heavily favored Muslim testimony over Christian testimony. In property disputes, Muslim witnesses received greater credibility, making successful defense of property rights almost impossible for Christian institutions. Court records reveal how false accusations justified confiscations. Convents were accused of sheltering rebels, illegally converting Muslims, violating building codes, or failing to pay obscure taxes. These accusations, whether genuine or fabricated, provided legal cover for seizures. Powerful Ottoman officials wanting particular properties manufactured justifications. Historical records describe convents occupying valuable urban property in Constantinople or other major cities. Prime locations made them targets for officials building private residences or profitable commercial enterprises. Archaeological evidence reveals how some convents responded. Excavations have discovered hidden caches where communities buried sacred texts, religious artifacts, and precious metals before confiscation, desperately trying to preserve heritage even as they lost physical spaces. Christian convents have traditionally educated young women in reading, writing, religious texts, music, and practical skills. Under Ottoman rule, these educational functions faced systematic restriction. Ottoman authorities viewed Christian education with suspicion as potential rebellion sources. Institutions teaching in Greek, Armenian, or Slavic languages rather than Turkish faced particular scrutiny. Those teaching Christian theology or history were seen as undermining Ottoman authorities' religious basis. Administrative records show many convents were forced to close schools or severely restrict educational activities. This created cascading effects. Literacy rates among Christian women declined. Knowledge of classical Greek texts deteriorated. Intellectual traditions preserved through these institutions for centuries began fading. For nuns themselves, this represented profound loss of purpose. Many had entered religious life specifically to teach, preserve knowledge, and transmit traditions. When regulations prohibited these activities, it removed central meaning from their vocations. Some convents continued teaching secretly, holding clandestine classes in violation of regulations. Historical sources describe underground schools where nuns taught small groups, always fearing discovery. If caught, both teachers and students faced punishment from fines to imprisonment. Ottoman authorities sometimes confiscated Christian books, particularly those in non-Turkish languages. Some texts were destroyed. Others were locked in imperial archives, removed from circulation. Manuscript collections maintained for centuries were particularly vulnerable. These included not just religious texts, but classical Greek philosophy, history, poetry, and science. Irreplaceable fragments of human cultural heritage. Some nuns attempted saving texts through secret copying or smuggling them to Christian lands in Europe. A manuscript preservation network developed, with religious women playing crucial roles, ensuring certain texts survived even as institutions housing them disappeared. Despite overwhelming pressure, Christian religious women found ways to resist and preserve their communities. Some resistance meant simply refusing to disappear. Convents facing economic pressure developed new income sources through specialized crafts, medical services, or agricultural innovations. Some became known for embroidery, honey, or medicinal herbs, creating economic niches, allowing continued function despite discriminatory taxation. Other convents maintained communities by accepting women with nowhere else to go. Widows facing forced remarriage to Muslim men fled to convents. Young women escaping arranged marriages found sanctuary there. Even Muslim women sometimes sought refuge in Christian convents when fleeing domestic situations, creating complex interfaith networks of women protecting women. Serbian and Greek Orthodox documentation describes networks maintaining communication and support despite Ottoman restrictions on movement and assembly. These networks allowed isolated communities to share resources, information, and survival strategies. When one convent faced crisis, others sent money, supplies, or personnel. Some acts were more direct. Historical records document cases of nuns openly challenging Ottoman officials. One famous account describes a Greek Orthodox abbess who, when ordered to hand over a boy hiding in her convent during a devshirme levy, told officials they would have to kill her first. The officials backed down. Cultural resistance took other forms. Convents became repositories of forbidden knowledge and practices. They maintained liturgical traditions Ottoman authorities tried suppressing. They preserved languages Ottoman policy tried replacing with Turkish. They taught histories Ottoman narratives tried erasing. Preserving specific artifacts carried symbolic significance. Icons, manuscripts, relics, chalices, and liturgical objects connected communities to history and faith. When confiscation threatened, convents organized elaborate smuggling schemes. One documented network moved valuable religious artifacts from Constantinople to convents in remote mountainous regions where Ottoman control was weaker. Resistance extended to maintaining historical memory itself. When written records were confiscated or destroyed, nuns preserved oral traditions. They memorized stories, genealogies, and histories, teaching these to novices, ensuring knowledge passed through generations even when written documentation became impossible. By the Ottoman Empire's early 20th century collapse, Christian populations in many regions had been decimated. Areas predominantly Christian for over 1,000 years had become majority Muslim through conversion, migration, and demographic pressure. The convent and monastery network, once covering Asia Minor, the Balkans, and the Middle East, had been reduced to a fraction of former extent. Buildings that survived centuries stood ruined or converted to other purposes. Communities of women who inhabited them had disappeared, their traditions and knowledge lost. Population exchanges and forced migrations following World War I represented the final chapter. Greek Christians were expelled from Turkey. Armenian Christians faced genocidal violence. Remaining Christian populations in formerly Ottoman territories became minorities in new nation-states, where they often faced continued discrimination. Surviving convents carried memory of what was lost. They maintained traditions newly extinguished. They preserved artifacts hidden for centuries. They represented continuity with a pre-Ottoman past that might otherwise have been completely erased. Modern historians and archaeologists continue uncovering evidence. Excavations reveal hidden chambers where communities sheltered persecuted individuals. Archives yield documents thought lost. Oral traditions maintained by surviving Christian communities provide insights written sources don't capture. The broader significance extends beyond Christian-Muslim relations. This history illuminates how religious minorities survive under systems designed to marginalize them. It shows mechanisms through which empires gradually transform religious demographics of controlled territories. It reveals human costs of systems built on religious hierarchy and discrimination. Understanding this complicates simplistic narratives about Ottoman tolerance. While Ottoman rulers allowed religious minorities to exist, relatively tolerant by medieval standards, the lived experience involved constant pressure, discrimination, and vulnerability. This system made non-Islamic religious life increasingly difficult and unsustainable across generations. Jewish communities under Ottoman rule faced similar restrictions: jizya taxes, clothing regulations, building restrictions, subordinate legal status. However, Jewish communities sometimes fared better because they weren't seen as political threats the way Christians were. The Ottomans fought numerous wars against Christian European powers, creating suspicion toward Christian subjects. Armenian Christians faced particularly severe persecution, especially in later Ottoman history. The Armenian genocide of 1915 to 1923 represented the extreme conclusion of religious and ethnic marginalization, logic characterizing Ottoman policy toward Christian minorities. Comparing the Ottoman system to contemporary European treatment of religious minorities reveals complex dynamics. Medieval Europe wasn't tolerant either. Jews faced persecution and expulsion. Christian heretics were executed. The Spanish Inquisition tortured and killed those suspected of secretly practicing Judaism or Islam. Key differences existed, though. European Christian kingdoms generally aimed to create religiously homogeneous populations through conversion or expulsion. The Ottoman system created permanent hierarchy, where religious minorities existed, but always in subordinate positions. Neither system was tolerant by modern standards, but they operated through different control logics. The harem system represented a particularly Ottoman form of gendered religious oppression. European slavery systems existed and involved exploitation, but weren't organized around religious hierarchy in quite the same way. The Ottoman harem specifically targeted non-Muslim women, treating their bodies as legitimate prizes of Islamic conquest. This centuries-old history carries profound contemporary relevance for understanding religious freedom, minority rights, and relationships between religion and state power. First, it illuminates how legal discrimination functions over time. The Ottoman millet system didn't require constant violence. It created structural conditions, gradually making minority religious life unsustainable. Tax codes, property law, and legal systems worked together to systematically disadvantage non-Muslims. What? This structural discrimination is subtler than overt persecution, but potentially more effective at transforming religious demographics across generations. Second, this history reveals the importance of protecting women's institutions. Convents weren't just religious sites. They were spaces where women exercised autonomy, pursued education, maintained communities independent of male control, and preserved knowledge and culture. When these spaces were suppressed or eliminated, women lost crucial forms of agency and community. Third, resistance strategies used by Christian religious communities offer lessons for minority communities facing pressure today. Outward compliance combined with secret preservation, maintaining networks across distances, emphasizing oral tradition when written records become impossible, smuggling cultural artifacts to safe locations, these strategies remain relevant. Fourth, this history challenges narratives of inevitable progress. Christian communities of Asia Minor thrived for over 1,000 years before Ottoman conquest. They developed sophisticated institutions, rich cultural traditions, and deep intellectual heritage. Within a few centuries of Ottoman rule, much had been dramatically reduced or eliminated. The story isn't steady progress, but profound loss and cultural continuity's fragility. Fifth, understanding this history reveals long-term consequences of organizing political systems around religious identity and hierarchy. When states create legal categories based on religious affiliation and assign different rights to different groups, they establish frameworks for ongoing discrimination and conflict. The Ottoman millet system legally enshrined religious difference as the basis for political rights, creating enduring divisions and resentments shaping Middle Eastern and Balkan politics today. The women who lived in convents under Ottoman rule left few written records. Most weren't literate in languages Ottoman administrators used. Their voices weren't recorded by Ottoman court historians. Their experiences didn't fit narratives later nationalist movements wanted to tell, but their absence from conventional historical narratives doesn't diminish their importance. We can reconstruct fragments through careful analysis of surviving documents, archaeological evidence, oral traditions, and comparative historical analysis. Each fragment reveals how ordinary people navigated extraordinary circumstances, how faith sustained communities under pressure, how women created autonomy spaces within systems designed to subordinate them. Their story is ultimately one of survival against long odds. Despite centuries of systematic pressure, Christian communities persisted in formerly Ottoman territories. Convents still function in Greece, Cyprus, and other regions where they once faced elimination. They maintain traditions stretching through the Ottoman period to Byzantine times and beyond. This continuity represents a kind of victory, a refusal to disappear when disappearance seemed inevitable. But survival came at tremendous cost. The richness of Christian religious life, once characterizing Asia Minor, the Balkans, and the Middle East, was dramatically reduced. Countless individual women suffered terribly. Knowledge was lost. Art was destroyed. Communities were scattered. The demographic transformation of these regions from majority Christian to majority Muslim, accomplished through centuries of pressure and discrimination, represents one of the most dramatic religious demographic shifts in human history. Remembering this history isn't about cultivating resentment or promoting religious conflict. It's about ensuring human experiences aren't forgotten simply because those who endured them lacked power to record their own stories. It's about understanding mechanisms to which discrimination systems operate. It's about recognizing resilience of communities maintaining identity against pressure to abandon it. For contemporary Christians in the Middle East and Eastern Europe, this history is part of their heritage. For historians, it offers insights into how empires manage religious diversity, how legal systems encode discrimination, how demographic change happens over long periods. For anyone concerned with human rights and religious freedom, it demonstrates what happens when societies organize around religious hierarchy. The women who lived in these convents, who faced impossible choices, who sometimes chose death of a violation of their deepest convictions, who maintained faith despite overwhelming pressure, who preserved knowledge and tradition against systematic efforts to erase it, deserve to be remembered. Their experiences deserve remembered all in the world. Their experiences deserve honest accounting of human history in all its complexity. The bells may have stopped ringing, the buildings may have been converted or left in ruins, but the memory of what happened there and the lessons it teaches must echo forward through time. This has been an examination of one of history's overlooked chapters, based on documentary evidence and archaeological findings. May we learn from both the cruelty and the courage it reveals.